Café. Before I go any further, yes, I am coming to you from Florida as opposed to my usual studio in Colorado, so let me know if things are working okay. It's my portable rig and I don't have as much experience and familiarity setting it up. So just let me know how things are working. Yeah, what I'm going to be doing today, this is the third Wednesday of the month. By my math, and so we are going to be doing what I call the Score of the Month series, where I basically just go about entering one particular piece of music into MuseScore, and we look at everything that comes up. So, excuse me. All right. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be doing here. And what I'm going to do is I've been often trying to tie these cafe sessions in with the harmony course, and I'm glad to see so many people checking in here and the people who I know are working through the course. And in the process of working on the kinds of things we're doing in the harmony course, I really I've been focusing on the idea of making sure we can play things on the piano in reasonable ways and trying to give some pointers on that. But now I want to show, given all the techniques that I've talked about, how I would go ahead and actually enter something into MuseScore using the the kinds of approaches that I've been talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new score here, and I'm going to create it for piano. Now I will say, if you want the simplest way of doing things, I'm actually going to do one of each. I'm going to create one for just piano. I'll go ahead and choose instruments and say I want a piano. But I'm also going to add, I'll add another instrument here. I guess I'll add oboe. And I'm not going to actually use the oboe here, but I do want to point out that if you're just looking for a nice, easy way of entering music with chords along with the melody and chords, it's really easiest to do it in two separate instruments. Do the melody in one staff and then do your accompaniment on another staff. And then you don't have to worry quite as much about the accompaniment getting in the way of the melody. But I've already shown things about that. I'm going to talk about doing it the way where we're actually going to put the melody on the piano staff. So I'm going to come over to the Instruments panel and just hide the oboe for now. We're going to ignore the oboe. I might bring it back later, but I've just turned off the oboe by clicking the little eye icon next to the oboe in the Instruments panel. So now I have just the piano part. And the music that I'm going to enter is the music that I've been using as my demonstration for some of these piano things that I've been talking about in some of the recent videos that I've posted in the newsletter about creating accompaniment, adding color tones, and so forth. So that was the folk song Londonderry Air, otherwise known as Danny Boy, because those are like the most famous lyrics that have been set to that melody. And I'm going to enter that music now from my memory of how I was doing it before. I don't have access to a keyboard where I'm at the moment, so I'm going to be kind of playing myself some air piano and kind of remembering how I'm doing things, and so it might not be exactly the way I played it in a video, but that's fine. One thing I remember about the piece is it was in fact, I should, if I were smart, I would just bring up at least the lead sheet that I had done already. So let me bring that up. So I guess this is the one I want with secondary dominance. And so I can at least look at what I've done. And so I'll refer back to this occasionally. So the thing I know is that I'm going to need to be in the key of E flat and have a pickup of 3 measures. And I didn't set that stuff up when I originally created my score because, as usual, I get anxious and I just create the score and I'm like, oh yeah, I should give it interesting information, which, I wouldn't advise. If you can slow down and enter the information when you're creating the score, so much the better. But let's go ahead and take care of that now. I'm going to come over to the palettes, key signature, and add myself E flat. And now in that first measure, I know I want it to be a pickup measure, so I'm going to right click it, go to measure properties, bar properties if you're using the British UK English translation. And I'm going to set the actual duration to 3/4 because that's how long it is. It's 3/4 notes. And I'm going to click exclude from measure count. And that will make it basically act like a pickup. It won't be counted in the so this won't be measure 1. And that's something that I've noticed a bunch of people doing as you've posted stuff in the harmony course. You're not always doing that, setting the exclude from measure count. So let me just show that again. It's this option here. This is what allows the pickup to be basically measure number 0, which is really what you want. Not that it really matters, but it's the convention, and so it's good because then it helps us. Like then we know measures 1 through 8 is going to be the first 8-bar phrase, and then 9 through 16 is going to be the next 8-bar phrase, and so forth. It's just the way things are usually going to be set up, and that's what I'm normally expecting. So I've got my pickup set up to be 3/4 and excluded from measure count. The next thing I want to do, I don't always do what I'm about to do, but I'm going to for this. If you look at the original, I had added system breaks. You can't see them because I've turned off the display of system breaks. If we look at the properties palette, I have nothing selected, right? I'll press escape to make sure I've got nothing selected. And over here in the properties panel, you'll see formatting is turned off. It doesn't mean that the formatting itself is, it means the display, show formatting is turned off. If I turn it back on, you can see that there are in fact system breaks, basically every 4 bars. So I'm going to add those right now. Excuse me. I'm going to add my system breaks every 4 bars because for music like this, relatively simple, structured music, it's often nice to just see it presented that way. It's not necessarily always going to be what you want, but I do feel it's a pretty good choice for this particular piece. 3 beats is what I meant to say, not 3 measures. So yes, if I said 3 measures, I meant 3 beats. So 3 beats, so 3/4 basically is the actual duration of that pickup measure. So let's see. So I want my I have a shortcut defined, by the way, Control / to set the width of my score to be page width. I find that pretty useful because then I can see the whole score. For this version of the score, this is just here for reference. I could switch to my presentation workspace, but I think I'm just going to close the properties and palettes and instruments panels. So F9, F7, and F8, we'll close them all, and now I can see my score a little better here. Okay, so coming back to my score here, I want system breaks every 4 bars, but not counting the pickup. So I'll start by selecting the next bar, and then I'll press Shift Control End to select all the way to the end of the score, and then go to Format, Add Remove System Breaks, and say that I want to break every 4 measures. Boom. Now I have system breaks every 4 bars starting after the pickup. While I'm at it, usually I talk about not worrying about adding formatting until you're done with the score, but there's some things that maybe are useful right away, like putting these breaks in helps me conceptualize the music while I'm entering it. Also notice that I have double bars basically marking the form. Every 8 bars there's a double bar. Now this isn't something you often see in classical music arrangements. It's something you often see in lead sheets and songbooks in general. So I do think it's kind of a useful structuring element. In any case, I'm going to do it. I also added one after the pickup, which helps you visually recognize that that is in fact the pickup. It's again just sort of a convention to do it that way, not by any means required. So I'm going to select this measure, open my bar lines palette, and click the double bar. And then I will do the same 8 bars later, do the same 8 bars later still, and the same 8 bars later still. And notice my last phrase Well, first of all, how long is the piece? Is it really this long? There's one 8-bar phrase, a second 8-bar phrase, a third 8-bar phrase, a fourth 8-bar phrase. So it's 32 bars plus one for the pickup. Well, I I started off by default when I created this score, it only got 32 bars, and one of them is now stolen to be the pickup. I still need to add one more bar to the end of my score, right? Because there's only 3 bars there. So Control B adds one more bar. And as we've discussed before, there was a convention used in kind of, up through maybe the 18th century that says if you have a pickup measure, you should shorten the last bar. We're in the 21st century right now, so I'm not going to use that convention. But you're certainly welcome to, if it pleases you, to shorten the last bar. And you do it the same way that I did shorten the first one. Right-click it, go to Measure Properties, and shorten it to only one beat. It makes it kind of useless, though, doesn't it? The last measure with only one beat, you'd have to add a whole extra measure and have that one beat in it. It seems kind of pointless in this piece. So in any case, I've got that set up. Now I'm going to enter the beginnings of my music. And the way I'm going to do it, if you saw the videos where I talked through my piano approach, let me describe the approach at sort of a high level first, and then we're going to enter the music. It involves me playing the melody in my right hand, playing the roots in my left hand, and then, but I'm using basically just the top few fingers of my right hand for the melody, bottom few fingers of my left hand for the roots, or whatever other bass note I use when there's an inversion like there is here. Let me turn my volume back up. Okay. So my middle fingers, not literally the middle finger, but all these fingers here, the inner fingers, my thumbs, index fingers, and third fingers here, they're going to be used to fill in the rest of the chord. And this is going to be a very simple thing with just basically block chords, but they're going to come every 2 beats, and there's going to be some inner voice motion, some places where an inner voice will move. And so I'm going to use multiple voices sometimes, and it ends up being a fairly effective basic starting point that you can then, get fancier with. But I don't need to talk about getting fancy now. I want to get something useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that melody. Why not? Select all, copy, come here, paste. So that's done. I got my melody, I got my chord symbols. Hey, I'm happy. The next thing that I want is I want to put the roots of those chords, or whatever bass note, like G here, in the left hand. So I'll go ahead and enter that. I'll come over, I'll start in this measure, and I won't put anything under the D. I'll just put in a quarter rest there, so 0, 5 for quarter, 0. And now I'll put in 6 for my B flat, and now I have to think about how I wanted to do this in terms of which octave I want that E flat to be in. I'm going to go with this E flat down here. The reason is I know I want to leave myself room for the inner voices. I'm going to fill in the rest of the chord and potentially some color tones in between here, and I want to leave myself room for it. Now, in point of fact, this is where it's starting to get a little low, and by that I mean let's talk about this right away, because I want to make sure that we understand this. One of the ways I might have chosen to voice this chord is to put a 7th, right, a major 7th on this chord. If I'm in a jazz setting, I would want a major 7th on it, an E flat and then a D above that. The thing is, I can totally do that, but it is a bit low. I'm going to go ahead and add that. So I've added the D, and then underneath the G, I'm just going to temporarily put a B flat in. This was my simple voicing of the chord, including a major 7th. Let me make sure my chord symbols aren't going to play. I don't want my chord symbols to play, so there's a couple ways of doing this, but I'm going to open my mixer, and then which I pressed F10 to do, and then you'll see the chords piano. Chords.piano means the chord symbols for the piano are, I'm just going to mute that track in the mixer, and then F10 to close it again. So I'm going to listen to this now. So whatever you might think about that major seventh chord, I mean, it's a very jazz thing. So if you're used to hearing jazz, that's going to sound fine. But even in the context of jazz, that's a little muddy. It's a little low for that major seventh. It's not completely out of the question. I usually draw a line at C. I talk about C level sometimes. I talk about middle C being an important point of reference where ideally if I'm voicing a chord in my right hand, I want some of it below middle C, part of it above middle C. And how much is below and above depends on other factors. But in general, right around middle C is where my chord voicings will want to live. So if I had done the version with oboe and having the melody in the oboe and then letting the rest of the chord be in the piano, letting the full chord be in the piano, I should say, then I would try to center that chord around middle C. But also the C below middle C, so C4, I guess, or 3. I always forget the I always forget the numbering system. Yes, I am at sea level. Good one there, Michael. So C3 is I'm at sea level because I can almost see the ocean from here. If I was on the fourth floor of this building, you might be able to see the ocean if you looked in the right direction. So yeah, so the C3 here is a point below which I don't want any chord tones other than just whatever the bass note is. Maybe a fifth. So so roots and fifths can go below C3, but no other chord tones typically would want to get below that point. In a lot of orchestration, in fact, but especially on piano. On organ, it's you don't even want to get that low with it. So this D is above that C level, but only barely, and this is a dissonant interval, that major seventh. And it's a pleasant dissonance as far as I'm concerned, but it's still dissonant, and it's pushing things to place that dissonance as low as it is. So be aware of that. And so for that reason alone, people might say, hey, let's do this in another key. But I'm not going to worry about it, all right? I'm talking about that because these are important considerations musically. But I'm not, for the most part, going to be focused on the musical considerations here. I'm just going to show you how to enter stuff. But, you know, music is music, MuseScore is MuseScore, but they relate to each other. So I've gone ahead and entered that D and E flat in this octave, and I'm going to live with it. For the purpose of what I'm doing, let me again give you a little heads up. When I said I'm going to split the notes between my hands here, melody, right hand, bass, left hand, and then inner hand, thumb and forefinger, etc., are going to be the rest of the chord. What this really means is that the note that is played in, basically, if you think of this as SATB, the tenor voice, you know, the top note in the left hand, if I'm going to play two notes in the left hand, that top note is going to always be a chord tone. Usually it's going to be a third or a fifth. And third or a fifth, occasionally a seventh. And so Allison is observing about giving a D to the alto and a B flat to the tenor. And so let's check this out. So here's the thing. If I do this, this isn't muddy at all. So beautiful, except I can't play that, right? This is too big of a spread in the left hand. So this is a reason why if I wasn't going to be comfortable with that, the muddiness of the sound I had before, if I thought that was going to be too bad, I would have had to choose to take this E flat up an octave. That's why I originally brought it up, and I never brought that full circle, so I'm glad, Allison, you brought that up. If I wanted this voicing, I would have to do it like this. And play the E flat in that octave. And that's certainly valid as well. If I tried taking the whole thing down, I could do that, but now I've got two notes below my C level, and it's a perfect fifth. I can maybe get away with it, but there's a pretty awkward gap between the hands, and this is going to feel a little awkward. So, Nelson is absolutely correct. I could totally play that all in my right hand. Absolutely. So, yes, I can totally do that and only play one note for this chord in my left and play the rest in my right. I'm interested, for the purpose of what we're doing here, in not having to think that hard. I know I'm thinking hard about a lot of things, but there's some things that I guess I want to have a system for and say, hey, well, let's just follow this system and know that if we follow this system, we're going to get we're going to get reasonable results. And then if you see opportunities to get better results by shifting things around, by all means, let's do it. But my system that I'm going to stick to pretty much exclusively is going to be 2 fingers per hand, because it's going to simplify my entry into MuseScore. And so transitioning from talking about the music theory aspect of it to talking about the MuseScore aspect of it, it's way simpler for me if I use one system to enter all these notes. And then I can go back and say, oh yeah, I can improve this one chord by shifting one note to the right hand or whatever. So absolutely that could be done. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And put the D. And I'm glad that everyone had that comment, because it is a really good comment, and you're absolutely right. And if the oboe had had the melody, I totally would have done that. I totally would have put all 3 notes in the right hand and then just a single note in the left. Absolutely. But for this particular style of trying to play the melody and chord, and get them to spread nicely, I often find it's best to spread the notes out like this. So that's the system I'm going to use, is 2 notes per hand, occasionally 3 in the right hand. And in the left hand, I was mentioning this top note here, the tenor voice note, is always going to be a chord tone. It's never going to be one of the color tones that I might add. Because, yeah, for this version, I am going to show you some of those color tones and how I'm going to go about adding those and the moving lines that get created, because it's going to involve multiple voices. But this bottom note here is always going to be a basic chord tone. This note in this system is never going to change. In other words, it's only going to change when the chord changes. So I'm not going to ever need multiple voices in my left hand using this approach. If I use this approach of having the bass note and one other chord tone in my left hand, then they will always change together. So, so that's kind of a nice thing. In this case, well, this chord lasts for a whole measure. I don't have that very often in the piece, right? Mostly in the piece you see I've got 2 chords per measure, but the first one I have just 1 chord in the measure, so that means this left hand is just a whole note. Now, the left hand is just a whole note. I could let the right hand just be that dotted half here and then change to F here, or I could introduce some motion. And that's what I'm going to be trying to do a little more consistently, introducing motion at least every 2 beats somewhere. So if the melody is not moving faster than every 2 beats, I'm going to let my alto voice basically move. So what I'm going to do then is I'm not going to have my alto voice on the same stem. I'm going to enter my alto voice in a separate voice in MuseScore. So I'm going to click the voice 2 button and then enter that B flat just as a half note. I don't know that that's how I'm going to keep it, but that's how I'm going to start it for now. I am now going to go back. So yeah, no, Allison, one step ahead of you, or you're 1 step ahead of me. It used to be a B flat. I changed it to D when we were talking about revoicing the chord, and then I forgot to change it back. But now it's changed back. So the other thing that I did, if you, so also then in the left hand here, I need to add my 7th, or add another note to this. And the way I had it was I had an A flat here because I wanted a 7th in there. And then I wanted a color tone to go in the right hand here. So in my right hand, I actually entered in voice, I'm going to enter in voice 2. Let's see, voice 2, Control Alt 2 is the shortcut. 5 for quarter, 0. And then I had a C, which is the 9th of the chord. And then I changed it to a flat 9, C flat. And then I add the 3rd. This is how I did it in the video that I just posted as part of the newsletter yesterday, right? I get confused because I record them in advance, but I think that's the one that just came out yesterday. So I have my 9 going to the flat 9, and then it leads nicely to the 5th here. So that was the sound that I have. So I'm going to use this consistent pattern, all right? It's going to be a pattern in which I have 2 notes in my left hand in the same voice. In my right hand, I'm going to let the melody be in the first voice and let my alto part be in the second voice. Now, if we look at what I have here, I am absolutely going to agree that there's something not ideal about my left hand jumping from root and 7th here to root and 7th here. And if I could reach a 10th and get a G instead of a D here, I'd be happier with it. But I know I can't reach that 10th. I'm going to be okay with this. I'm going to say that I'm okay with this 7th jumping down here. It's not ideal. I will absolutely agree it's not ideal. And so with that said, switching to that other voicing that people were suggesting is absolutely a possibility, and now you've convinced me. So I'm going to take this thing up an octave and take this guy down to a B flat and take this up to a D. Now, when I do this, so when I have this now, yes, from a strict classical voice leading perspective, I expect that A flat to come down to a G, but there's already a G in the melody, and I'm not feeling like I want to double that necessarily. You absolutely could, and if this were a whole session just on voice leading and the theory behind it, we could talk about when the 7th absolutely has to resolve to the 3rd and when it's optional because the melody or some other voice is already taking the 3rd and there might be other practical considerations. But I do want to focus a little more on the mechanics of what I'm doing, like how I'm entering this into MuseScore, and if you follow this procedure, you'll always get reasonable results. Because my goal here isn't to get the world's best results, it's to get reasonable results. So here, I'm still following that basic idea of taking my E flat chord with the melody in voice 1 in the right hand and the bass note plus one other chord tone in the left hand, and then filling in something else in the alto voice. So I mentioned that I want to have something move in the middle of this measure. So I'm going to give you a couple simple little rules here. And Allison was asking about the flat 9, and this is a thing where if you watch that video that I posted yesterday in the newsletter about adding altered color tones, anytime there's a dominant 7th chord resolving down a 5th, whether it's the actual 5, so in this case this is the actual 5 chord resolving to 1, C flat is a borrowed tone. It comes from the key of E flat minor. In the key of E flat minor, that C flat would be a chord tone, and if you think about the 7 chord in the key of E flat minor would be D diminished, D, F, A flat, C flat. So the fully diminished 7 chord would totally have that C flat in it, and therefore if you build a 5 chord and include that flat 7, as Bach often did, or Beethoven for that matter, it's really been a pretty time-honored tradition in minor keys of putting that flat 9 on dominant chords. What we are now doing is borrowing that sound even though we're in a major key. A much less common thing to do prior to 1800, but since 1800, the idea of borrowing that sound even in major keys is pretty common, and so that's why we could have these flat 9s and also, as we'll see later, flat 13s. So this flat 9 should resolve then downward, and it does in this case to that B flat, so I'm okay with it. So whenever I'm having a dominant resolve down a 5th, I can do that motion. 9 to flat 9, and if it also works, I can put 13 to flat 13 with the exact same rationale, that it comes directly from the parallel minor. Those are 2 motions that I can create within. Oh, and also 4 to 3. Those will also be good motions that I can include anytime I'm trying to create motion within a dominant seventh. Within a major chord, just a plain major triad, or a plain minor triad, unfortunately there's less interesting motions I can create. As a result, I'm more inclined to want to change the chord, but as long as we accept a certain jazziness in our sound, we can do this thing of letting the major seventh move to the sixth. That's a thing. So I can totally let that guy move to the C. So let's look at this measure. These two measures are going to be a model for everything else that we're going to be doing. The left hand, again, is simple. It's just the root and one chord tone all in one voice. The right hand is a little bit more complicated structurally in that there's the melody in one voice, and then in a second voice is the other chord tone, but it's going to change with the chord, which might not be in sync with the melody, right? So the chord might change faster than the melody or slower than the melody. And in this particular case, because there was nothing on beat 3, I wanted to create some motion, so I took advantage of the fact that major 7 can move to 6 and we'll be okay with it. You could also move it back up to the root, would be another possibility. So let's come to the next measure and just use the same approach. I'll enter let me just go ahead and enter the rest of the bass notes. So I want a half note 6, E flat, and then I want my G, and I'm going to go ahead and jump down because I know I'm not going to want my G as high as the top of the staff here. And then I have a whole note A flat, and then half notes F, B flat, and then still half notes E flat, A flat down here, G, C, F, and that one should have been a whole note because this one the chord doesn't change. Since I've already entered a half note, I can fix that now. If I press Shift W, it lengthens it one notch. So from half note to dotted half, Shift W again, lengthens it again. So sometimes I get lazy and I don't enter my duration before the note. If I've got a whole bunch of notes of the same duration in a row, like I had all those half notes in a row, I will get lazy like that. And Shift W to lengthen a note or Shift Q to shorten it. Totally works. So now back to half notes. So 6, F, and then these two chords, B flat 7, sus 4, B flat 7 sus. It's really just one chord. It's really a half note B flat, and then E flat, and I don't know what octave I want there, but I'll just stop here because I'm sure I won't get any further than this today, especially if we have as many great questions as we've had so far. So I've got those notes in, and now I want to fill in my inner parts of my chord. And here is where I don't want to fill them in without thinking this through on the piano a little bit. So I'm going to play my air piano, and okay. Okay, so the way my air piano is telling me is I want to keep the B flat here, and in my left hand, I know it's always just going to be same voice. I'm just adding a note to the chord, so shift letter name. So on this chord, I want to add an E flat, so shift E flat. And that's because I've already worked these voicings out, and again, if you don't have a sense of how I'm doing this, definitely watch the video that I posted Tuesday because it has a lot of this information in it. So my left hand now has the root or other bass note plus one other chord tone, and then my alto voice is left to either double a root or add a color tone or add a seventh or whatever else I need. So let's come back. I'm going to use Control left to go back to that measure, and Alt up is the shortcut to move up a staff. It'll either move up to the next voice or to the next staff. It moves between voices or between staves. So here I want half notes to go with the chord, and so I'll type 6 for the half note and enter a D flat minus D. Whoops, I forgot to change to voice 2, so let me undo that. Now I'm going to switch to voice 2 with Control Alt 2, and then 6 minus D. Did I forget the minus? I thought I typed a minus, but whatever, down arrow it is. Oh, that's because I had already pressed minus. When I pressed it again, it toggled it off. Okay, so I now have that seventh in there. And uh, the next measure, I mean, not the next measure, the next chord, I still don't have my seventh in there, so I guess I want another D flat. I don't have any color tones here. In the first half of the measure, my C provides a little color already, right? It already provides some color for me, but the second half of the measure doesn't have any color tones in it. It just has basic chord tones. But I've mentioned in those videos that I'm kind of okay with that. Whenever you have a chord in an inversion like this, even in a jazz setting, we often play them simpler and don't worry as much about color because the sound of the inversion is, in a sense, its own color. And color tones will create different overtones and so forth with bass notes other than the root and don't necessarily do the things they would otherwise do, if that makes sense. Um, so that measure's done. And I'm going to use this, I'm going to keep using this approach. And, I talked through the theory at the beginning, but I think you'll see that now as I'm going, the process is going to go pretty smoothly. I'm going to move back down to the bottom staff and thinking through how I did this. Now here's a place where, I said before that the left hand was always going to only need one voice. And sorry, I'm kicking something here. That the bottom staff is always going to need one voice. But there might be places where you want two voices in the bottom staff. But in this case, I'm just going to add an E flat to that A flat. And what I'm missing on the first beat here is the third of the chord, right? So I'm always picking, I'm thinking I've got my melody, I've got my bass note, and I want to make sure I get the rest of the chord filled in, and then if I have fingers left over, I'll worry about color tones. So the chord tone that was missing on the first beat, if I have F and A flat, I'm missing both a third and a fifth. Well, I see that I'm about to get a fifth, and I'm also about to get a third. So I'm like, right, one of those is about to be taken already. Um, but in any case, I'm splitting the notes up and trying to decide which they are. And I realize that while the melody moves, I might change which color tone I add in my right hand. So what I'm going to do is I added that E flat here, and that's going to be fine, and that E flat will be doubled for a second, but I don't have a third, and I'm not willing to wait until beat 3 for the third. So I'm going to add the third at the beginning of this measure in voice 2, as I'm always going to be doing. Voice 2, 6, C. And now that the third is in the melody, I'm going to come down and add my seventh, my major seventh, because I can do that. And yeah, so I would say, first of all, I'm not aware of a hymn that is set to this. There might be, but this is more of a folk song as I know it. And so it's not something that would be likely to be played in a church. But in any case, yeah, the point of the harmony course is to learn about all of harmony from the Renaissance to the present and not just to focus on Renaissance or Baroque music. So it's absolutely the case that we're trying to learn in the harmony course about not just Baroque, not just Renaissance and Baroque music, but also classical music, also Romantic era music, also jazz and pop, and all of the entire wealth of Western music and what it has to offer. So yeah, it's definitely the case that we're not going to be limiting ourselves to only Renaissance and Baroque sounds. So I've added my third to this chord and my seventh then here, and I'm gonna just keep going here. In the next measure, I'm gonna add something. I need to add more. Thinking about how I was doing this before, and I don't necessarily remember how I did it before, but I could totally see that I could add an E flat on top of the F, and I could totally add an A flat on top of the B flat. And when I do this, notice that again, voice leading wise, this is not ideal, right? Root and seventh, not ideal. Um, so there's not ideal and there's good enough to get the job done when you're trying to sort out what your music is going to sound like. And in point of fact, this type of voicing where we do jump from a root and seventh to a root and seventh is not unheard of in this type of arrangement for piano. It's not uncommon that we will see from chord to chord like this if we have two beats or more to get there, situations where there's a little more wholesale jumping around from a root position chord to a root position chord. It's not the end of the world, even when it's not ideal. What you don't want is a lot of jumping around faster than that. So in any case, I've got my sevenths in here, and that is because I knew I wanted a third. And the thing is, I don't want my third way down here. That's going to be too low. If I had put my third, my F minor, way down here, it's too low. But if I put it way up here at the top of the staff, I can't reach it. Actually, I can probably reach F to A flat, but only barely. And it doesn't give me room for another note in the right hand. So, so that's why I didn't want to put the A flat there. I could put a C here. I totally could have made this guy be a C, but I knew I was going to want that seventh in there somewhere for both chords, and it's just as well. So I've got my two notes in the left hand, and now in the right hand, I will switch to voice 2 and use the same approach of switching to voice 2 and entering my remaining chord tone, the fifth. And in this case, my remaining chord tone is the D. So, okay, so if you remind me when we're done, Richard, I will absolutely post this when I'm done. So yeah, you could totally grab that, but you'll have to remind me of that. Yeah, and oh, by the way, Steinar, that Percy Grainger arrangement of this is super duper famous. I played that in high school too, and it's, Percy Grainger is famous for his, not necessarily discovery, but for unearthing and arranging and popularizing a lot of folk music and putting it on the map, and the way he approached doing so in terms of harmonization also then strongly influences how we perceive of those pieces today. I didn't realize, though, that Percy Grainger was Australian. For some reason that I had not remembered that. So in this measure, I'm about to play these first four measures here, but before I do it, I want to talk about something that I've managed to avoid so far, but I don't think I'm going to want to avoid it any further. In this measure, I really want color tones on that B flat 7 chord, and other than that G, I'm not getting any. If you watch the video, you may recall I'd use that 9 flat 9 trick, right? I put the ninth on that B flat chord and then changed to flat 9 on beat 4. I could get away with adding those notes to the melody, add the C to the G, in other words, right, literally shift C, add it like that, so it's like two notes in the first voice and one in the second. I could do that, but that only works because the melody happens to be moving at the same rate that I want to add this. I definitely want a C on beat 3, a C flat on beat 4, but the melody happens to be moving at that same rate. But if I weren't going to depend on that, I'm going to undo those changes, I would just need a third voice for it. And that's something that's going to happen. When we're creating this type of arrangement, we might need three voices in the right hand. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to switch to voice 3, Control-Alt-3, and I don't need voice 3 until the middle of the measure. So I'll enter a half rest, 6, 0, and then V to hide that rest. And now I'll enter 5, C, and then B, oops, not B, but C flat. So I pressed up a couple times to get it up to C and down to get it to C flat. So this is using multiple voices instead of a single chord. Is this better? No, but I wanted to show you that we are eventually going to need to have three voices, whether I was going to need it here or not. And I was going to need it for that reason. If the melody had just stayed on G for 2 beats, I would have needed a third voice to get that note to move. So I wanted to make sure I showed that. This chord here does not actually have a color tone in it, right? And I've got 3 notes in the right hand later in the measure, but I've only got 2 notes in the right hand here. I can totally add my color tone here. I'm just going to add a G. Ninths are going to be the color tones I'm going to add to F minor 7. And Allison, yeah, I don't know if Allison, if you're still with us or not here, but I will just mention that most people in the year 2023 have grown up listening to music created, within the last 100 years. So, yeah, this might not be an appropriate arrangement for a church setting, but it is definitely the case. Well, unless it's a church that's using modern music, and a lot of them do. Certainly, the churches that I grew up in used modern music a ton. But most audiences today have grown up hearing these sounds, whether they come from jazz or whether they come from pop or whether they're in movie scores. These kinds of sounds are definitely a part of the modern vocabulary, so most listeners are accustomed to hearing them. So let's hear what this actually sounds like, what I've just added, what I've just done. All right, so one thing that I know happened is there's a bug in Muse Sounds where if you have the same note in 2 different voices, one right after another, sometimes they don't play correctly. I'm just going to switch from the Muse Sounds piano to the MS Basic piano to get around that bug and also just generally have a little better responsiveness here. So I'm going to hear that again, but this time I'm going to add a tempo marking. That's a bit slower. I think I figured out that 108 was a tempo I liked for this. Let me save it now, by the way, because I have not saved it yet, and that's bad of me. And I will put this in my cafe folder, and then when I'm done, I will try to remember to post it. All right, so let's hear it again. All right, so this is the sound, right? This, if you watch the video that I posted Tuesday, these might not be exactly note for note what I played, but it is basically the approach, right? This is, I'm sure some of these voicings are exactly what I did. I'm now going to enter the next few measures a little more quickly and not talk about everything I'm doing unless something new comes up. So you can see that when you're doing this for real, it can actually go pretty quickly. So again, I'm thinking through how I was doing this, and normally I'd work it out on the piano, then transfer it into this. I would be thinking it through on the piano a measure at a time, and then write it in here. So I'm kind of doing that. Yeah, okay. Another, whoops, not another E flat there, but another E flat there. And then an F, whoops, here, Shift F, and then Shift G on this one. And then Shift E flat here, and then E flat, A flat. So those are those notes. I'll write a few times, Alt up, and now I'm going to enter my alto voice. So I wanted it to be, I want to get my 7th, got to switch to voice 2, Control Alt 2, 6, D, and to have a color tone on there, I'll add an F, and then my A flat chord needs a 3rd. There's about to be one in the melody, but that's not good enough for me. I want it. I guess I'll add a major 7th to it, a G. And now on my G minor chord, I don't have my fifth, so I will enter that. And if I want to add a color tone, I'll make it be the ninth. Oh yeah, so here's the thing. When we're adding color tones, and I talk about adding ninths and sixths, unless we're talking about dominant chords, they will always be major ninths and major sixths that we're adding. So on this G minor chord, the ninth that I'm adding is an A natural, a major ninth above the root. So I'm always adding major ninths, even for minor chords, and even when that means it's outside the key. It's just going to sound prettier. And when I play it, hopefully you will agree. So for my E flat, my C minor chord, I need to enter my seventh, and here's color tone. And now this is one of those measures where there was going to be some motion. And so someone mentioned about suspensions. Here's going to be one for you. I'm going to enter 2 beats of B flat. So it's a suspension. It's a B flat held over from the previous measure and let it resolve to the third. But that's not going to be good enough. I want a color tone in here, and I'll go ahead and add the 13th or the 6th, and I will let it move down to a flat 13. Oops. Try this one more time. There we go. So in this measure here, what I've done is I've let there be a 4 moving to 3, and a 6 or 13 moving to a flat 6 or flat 13. And this is another one of those sounds that's related to that 9 moving to flat 9 sound. Again, D flat, not diatonic in the key of E flat major, but it is diatonic in E flat minor. And borrowing that note over it's also more to the point, this F7 is a secondary dominant going to B flat, that D flat is diatonic in the key of B flat minor, and that's really where it's being borrowed from. So that idea of using flat 9s or flat 13s on dominant chords that are going down a fifth, it is a borrowed chord technique that's been with us since the not the Renaissance, but since the Romantic era. And it's just a really pretty sound, as you'll hear when I finish this. So let me get this last measure in here. Back to voice 2 with Control-Alt-2. I need my 7th, which is A flat. And I meant to do it as a half note, so Shift W a couple times. And I need a 5th on this chord, so I'll enter a C. And notice what's happening voice leading wise. I'm getting da, dum, and this guy should have a courtesy natural on it, so I'll add it. And I'm getting da, da, dum, right? I'm getting these moving lines actually having nice voice leading. Save again. So good reminder, Richard. So if you use these techniques, the technique of having 9 to flat 9 or 13 to flat 13 or 4 to 3, and you're using the chords in the expected way that chords move, following the circle of fifths, all the traditional things that I teach about in the Harmony and Chord Progressions course. If you do those things, then when you use these voicing techniques, you end up getting these nice voice leading things like ba-da-dum and ba-da-dum. You get those things, or ba-dum, bum. You get these nice voice leading things that just sort of happen almost without thinking about it. Now, I said almost without thinking about it. This one here, ba-dum, bum, the B flat isn't present here, right? This guy didn't get to finish his thought. So, for that reason alone, I might add another note here, just to let that guy resolve. Just to make sure ba-da-dum resolves. So there you go. Yeah. So yeah, continuous cloud storage. I'm not sure exactly what that would mean in the context of MuseScore, because MuseScore certainly expects you to save, but it's definitely the case that I'm on a Chromebook, so every time I save, it automatically goes to the cloud. It goes to MuseScore also, but I still have to hit save. but every time I hit save, it automatically goes to my Google Drive folder. So, did I make any mistakes in here? I don't know, but I want to hear it. Oops. Well, other than the fact that I didn't mean to put a natural sign on that A, it didn't sound bad, right? That turned this F minor into an F7 chord. I meant to put a courtesy flat on it, but I put a natural on it. It made this a secondary dominant, which would have been okay if I didn't already have a secondary dominant in the previous measure. Yeah, it would have sounded fine to me, except I just came from that A. I really want this guy to go down to an A flat and have a courtesy flat sign on it. So let me hear that again. Oh, and I need to have that same trick here of having the C, the ninth, which is actually just a quarter note. Oops, undo that. Shift Q. And so my color tone C, and then it's going to go to a D and a C flat, and then resolve to a B flat. So yeah, that's all coming together nicely. So yeah, I would have to keep thinking about how that chord is going to be going forward, but I'm about out of time here, so I'm going to save this again, and yeah, let's just kind of look. So Joanne, you're asking something about the seventh measure, but I'm not sure what. And so if you're asking about that flat that I just added, maybe I just answered it, but I'm not sure exactly what you're asking about. But yeah, this measure here, so yeah, this sixth is the 13th of that F7 chord, and it is a common note to use in conjunction when you have that 4 to 3, which is when you have a single dominant seventh chord taking up a whole measure, we want to and then the melody is just sitting on a whole note, which I have to say happens a lot. It happens a lot that we're going to have a whole note in the melody and a single dominant seventh chord, and we're going to be like, well, how can I create some interesting motion in there? Well, one way is to actually have counterpoint and actually have, multiple moving lines, but in addition to that, we might want to have a sense of harmonic motion, and one simple technique for that is to have that 4 resolving to 3. So when you have that dominant seventh, treat it as F7 sus for 2 beats resolving to F7, and then in conjunction with that, either have 9 going to flat 9 or 13 going to flat 13. So Kevin asks the kind of $1,000,000 question here. I've added all these color tones here, but my chord symbols don't reflect it. So I'm going to get on my soapbox and give you my thoughts on that, which will be different than someone else's. My thoughts on that is, if you are presenting this to jazz musicians, don't put in, don't give it to them. If you're giving this to jazz musicians, don't write in ninths and 13ths and so forth, because it's telling them they have to play those notes specifically. If you're giving someone chord symbols, normally it's because you trust them to come up with their own chord voicings, and if they're decent musicians, they're going to know how to add ninths or 13ths themselves. So it's cluttering to tell them to put a ninth on this chord or a flat nine, or it ends up being cluttering, too much information to tell them in the chord symbol to add this thing. They're going to do it on their own. In a jazz setting, we will add our own ninths and 13ths and flat nines based on our understandings of all these principles. So if you're writing for jazz musicians, who are the people who are most likely going to want to be using the ninths and 13ths anyhow, you don't need to write them. So in my case, I wouldn't be writing in any of this stuff, except maybe this one place where it's F7 for a whole measure. I might write this as F7 sus for 2 beats followed by F7. I might do that. Let me save that again. But I'm not going to write in every single alteration. The one situation, well, there's 2 situations where we there's two situations where we will write in ninths and 13ths in our chord symbols. One is if the melody note is that. If the melody note is the 13th of the chord, then I will often write 13 in the chord symbol just to make sure someone doesn't get the wise idea to make it a flat 13 and it'll clash with the melody, because maybe they're not looking at the melody, they're just looking at the chord symbol. So if the melody note is itself a ninth or a 13th, then we will often write the 9 or 13 on the chord symbol. That's one situation. The other situation is if this is like a big band arrangement, you need to make sure that the pianist or guitar player are not putting in extensions or alterations that conflict with what the horns have in their arrangement. So if it's a situation where the horn section has a complex voicing, you're going to need the piano part to reflect those same alterations so they don't muddy the sound by adding conflicting alterations. So those are the two settings. Either the melody note is an extension or there's extensions already written in a horn part. Those are the situations where you would put these extensions in the chord symbols. So I guess that's what I would do. And yeah, John Fedchock, absolutely, Colleen, you're right, because he writes very thick voicings in the horns, and therefore the piano parts will do that too. Now, in a lot of cases, then, in the solo sections, they'll write simpler changes. But anyone who writes a lot of background figures, as John Fedchock does, you're going to still have those things happen. So let me just play through it one more time, and then we'll call it. So let's just hear what we got here. And yeah, so this sound in that measure there. Oh, you're talking about this measure, sixth measure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess the ninth is a sound that maybe you're not quite as familiar with. It's definitely a very well-established sound since the Romantic era, but it's very big in choral music also, those ninths. Anyhow, let's hear it. All right, well, there you have it. I think it came out pretty well. So that's my basic process here, and just pay attention to the overall structure here, where I basically have two notes in the left hand in a single voice, melody and an alto voice in two voices, and every once in a while might even need a third voice in the right hand. This is, to me, sort of a great starting point if you're going to be working out harmonizations for pieces as part of the course. This is an approach you want to be comfortable with. All right, and thanks, Richard, for the reminder to upload. I will do that as soon as I'm done. So let me just play out my theme music. Actually, while I'm at it, I think I need to restart something else, because that's sounding weird, right? Hey, that sounds lovely, and it's because I don't have my sample rate set. Watch this. And suddenly it's fixed. Okay, so sorry about that. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for all the nice comments and questions about the process. And by all means, you don't have to always be adding all this chord stuff. I wanted to make sure I'm showing you how to do these things theoretically in some videos. I'm also showing you how to make MuseScore. So that was what we were doing here. So tomorrow we'll be looking at some of the music that you've all been submitting. We'll catch up on some of your project submissions with secondary dominance or whatever else. And we'll be posting more stuff with the borrowed chords, and I'll have another project post later in the week where we'll do more with the borrowed chords and maybe build an arrangement around them. So looking forward to tomorrow. I will again be coming from Florida. Not sure if I'll have a keyboard handy, but we'll make things happen and have fun. So, oh, the music was too loud to hear. Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. I forgot that turning the volume down wasn't going to accomplish that. So anyhow, see you tomorrow. I will be coming at you and talking about the music that we're doing for the harmony course tomorrow. So by all means, keep submitting projects, and I will see you then. Okay, bye everyone.